Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our podcast on South and Southeast Asia. Our learning objective is to explain how and why various states of South and Southeast Asia developed and maintained power. This morning's podcast is brought to you by coffee, making me a better human being since 2005. We're going to be focusing for a minute on just some of the things you should know about the Indian subcontinent, specifically the geography. And the geography makes it very difficult for a long term government to truly unify the subcontinent. You should know about monsoon winds, which is what enabled Indian Ocean trade, and how mariners will learn to sail on these monsoon winds. So, starting with the Vedic Age, and this is very early India. So, after the demise of the Indus Valley, which is around 1900 BCE, Indo European warriors migrated into India. And what happens is, as they begin pushing into the Ganges Valley, using new iron tools, by the way, because we're in the Iron Age, there's going to be a conflict between the light skinned Arya tribes and the darker skinned Dravidian speaking Dasas tribes. And eventually, the Aryan tribes push the Dasas into southern India. And the struggle between these two groups leads to the development of a system of Varna. Now, Varna actually means color, but the equivalent word is class, and it's essentially a class system. And under this system, people were then born into one of four Varna. So you have your Brahmin, which is your priests and scholars, Krishita, which are warriors, the Vaishya, which are merchants, and then the Shudra, which were your peasants and laborers. And then a fifth group, which were referred to as the untouchables, were outside the system. And they consisted of people whose jobs were viewed as demeaning or ritually polluting work. And typically that involved physical contact with dead bodies of animals or horses. And the four Varna were divided into hereditary occupational groups. They're also called jati, and you've probably heard this as the caste before. And caste is actually a Portuguese word also meaning color. Jati were arranged in order of a hierarchy. There were complex rules that were governed, and this looks at occupation, at duties, and rituals. It also lays regulations that concern the actual interactions between people of different jatis. The system of Varna and Jati were rationalized by the belief of reincarnation. And according to this belief, each individual has an immortal soul, the Atman, and after death, they'll be reborn into another body. But one's station in the next life depended on one's actions in the current life and then previous lives. And this is something called karma. So if you're a good person, you'll be born into a higher caste. If you're a terrible human being, born into a lower class or born as something undesirable, like a beetle or a spider. Holy texts include the Upanishads, and those were composed between 900 BCE and 600 BCE. And it includes the idea of the transmigration of souls. The Vedic religion emphasized the worship of male deities through sacrifice. Religious knowledge and practice was the monopoly of the Brahmin priests. And they memorized rituals, prayers, and hymns, and they also opposed the introduction of writing to the masses because this would have reduced their monopoly on religious knowledge and thus reduced their power. We don't know a lot about the status or roles of women in the Vedic period. We do know they could study lore, they could participate in rituals, they could own land, and they married while they were in their middle or late teens. During the Vedic period, there were people who reacted against the very rigid social hierarchy and against the religious monopoly of the Brahmins. And when you look at the lives of people who are especially in the Shudra class, the untouchables, we can really develop a strong understanding as to why this happened. These people actually withdrew into the forests and they pursued salvation through yoga, meditation, and special diets. And their goal was to achieve something called Moksha, which was liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And there's two religions we're going to be looking at, Jainism and Buddhism. And Jainism was founded by Mahavira in 540 to 468 BCE. We're not sure of the exact year that Jainism was founded, But we do know they practiced extreme nonviolence, and they also went to great attempts to not kill any living thing. Very extreme Jains actually starved themselves to death to avoid killing any living creature. And this also does include killing vegetables as well when it's taken to the extreme level. Those who were less extreme devoted themselves to commerce and banking, occupations that, unlike agriculture, do not require one to kill. Buddhism, on the other hand, was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, and he was actually a member of the Vedic faith. His title, Buddha, means the enlightened one. And he was alienated by the extremes of the wealthy youth and his experiences. He set forth his teachings of the Four Noble Truths and of the Eightfold Path that would lead the individual to enlightenment. Some of his followers took vows of celibacy, nonviolence, and poverty. The goal of Buddhism centered on an individual's attempt to gain enlightenment through moderate living, self-discipline, and meditation. The ultimate goal was to achieve nirvana, the release from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. After the death of the Buddha, some of his followers organized themselves into monasteries and nunneries, and they developed a complex hierarchical religion complete with worship of the Buddha, reverence for the Bodhisattvas. This would actually be referred to as Mahayana Buddhism, meaning the Great Vehicle, as opposed to Theravada, which followed the original teachings of the Buddha more closely. So, in review of Moksha versus Nirvana. Summary up here, but in short, moksha refers to the liberation from the cycle of births and deaths, as human life is believed to be one full of pain and suffering. And nirvana, in short, is believed to be the state of mind that is attained when one reaches enlightenment. It's a state of mind when human emotions become stable and the feelings or emotions get dissolved. That leads us to the evolution of Hinduism. Pressure from new religious movements led to the reform of the old Vedic faith. And as a result of this reform, the foundational element of Vedic religion incorporated the intense personal religious devotion, fertility rituals, symbolism of the southern Dravidian culture, and elements of Buddhism. Sacrifice became less important, while the role of personal devotion to the gods increased. As part of the reform, two formerly minor Vedic deities took the places of honor in the Hindu faith: Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. And the goddess Devi also became more prominent. Hindu worship centered on temples and shrines, and it also included service to the gods and a pilgrimage. The religious duties of an individual varied according to gender, social status, and age. The transformation from Vedic religion to Hinduism was incredibly successful. In fact, it was so successful, it became the dominant religion of India. Hinduism appealed to the common people's need for the personal deities with whom they could have a direct connection. Theravada Buddhism was far too austere to have popular appeal on a mass level. And Mahayana Buddhism was so close to Hinduism that its beliefs could very easily be absorbed by the larger religion. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Mauryan Empire and the Gupta Empire. The core of the Mauryan Empire began early on in a different kingdom, the kingdom of Magadha, which benefited from a very strategic location and plentiful agriculture and iron resources. The Mauryan Empire was founded by Chandragupta, who expanded it along the successors until it included almost the entire subcontinent. The Mauryan government made its capital at the walled and moated city of Pataliputra. The imperial establishment included a large army, and that was supported by a 25% tax on certain agricultural products, and also by state monopolies on mines, shipbuilding, and weapons. The most famous emperor is Ashoka, and he reigned from 273 to 232 BCE. Ashoka was shaken by the sheer carnage that he saw in a very brutal war during one of the expansion quests, if you will. And when he saw the destruction, he actually converted to Buddhism. And his Buddhist policies are preserved in edicts that were inscribed on rocks and pillars at various points throughout the empire. And at the top, you can see one of the stupas, but this particular one is the burial mound of Ashoka. It's very important that you know that. The Mauryan Empire would collapse in 184 BCE. And what you'll see are periods of fragmentation as it slowly breaks apart. This period of political fragmentation was characterized by cultural development that included the writing of the Mahabharata, which also includes the very famous Bhagavad Gita. And that addresses the contradiction between the duty to society and the duty to one's own soul. The Bhagavad Gita suggests that this contradiction can be resolved when one is aware that any form of disciplined action taken without regard for personal benefit is, in fact, a service to the gods. This period would also see the development of herbal medicine and the analysis of Sanskrit. The Gupta Empire. The rulers of the Gupta Empire brought northern and central India together under their control, but not the south. Like the Mauryan rulers, the Gupta controlled certain mines, such as iron deposits. They established state monopolies, and again, they collected 25% agricultural tax. But they're never as strong as the Mauryan Empire. The Gupta used their army to control the core of their empire, and they had a system of government where provisional administration was left to governors who pretty much turned their posts into hereditary positions and then into their own smaller little kingdoms. They do this because the Gupta don't have a sufficient military force. Thus, they need that power spread throughout the empire. To exercise and maintain power, in addition to the governors, they also had the theater state, which essentially distributed luxury goods throughout the empire and dazzled the dependents far away from the capital in return for gifts, loyalty, and taxes. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of archaeological data that we can get a really good insight of to the politics, society, and culture of the Gupta period. We do know that the court supported math and astronomy, and as a result, the Gupta mathematicians are the ones that invented the concept of zero, write that down, and the so-called Arabic numerals. They also supported literary endeavors, and we have evidence from the Chinese monk Funan to support that. What we do know in terms of society is that women lost the right to inherit and own property, as well as to participate in key rituals, and they were also treated like the lowest Varna, the Shudra. They were married very young, and in some places, when a woman's husband died, the widow was required to burn herself on the husband's funeral pyre, and this is a tradition called sati. The only way to escape this was to join a religious community, be a member of a very wealthy family, or to become a courtesan. As in Greece and China, this changed a woman's status. And this changes from urbanization and the growth of non-agricultural property-owning middle class. And you will see this in numerous empires, even beyond Greece and China. The Gupta period was dominated by Hinduism, but there was religious tolerance. That being said, you do see the Gupta having an extreme period of power, influence, and wealth given back to the Brahmin class. The Gupta Empire was linked to the outside world by extensive trade. Changing gears, and we're going to talk about Southeast Asia. Specifically, we're looking at the kingdom of Funan. Southeast Asia received waves of migrations of Malay people from southern China. Malay migrations continued into the Pacific Islands and into the Indian Ocean. The first major state was the kingdom of Funan. And Funan thrived because of its location. It was the best possible spot to be in for Indian Ocean trade. This became the major port. In the kingdom of Funan, you're going to see a combination of Hindu and Buddhist culture, as well as, well, in addition, I should say, to local indigenous beliefs. The rise of Srivijaya, which is located on Sumatra, dominated southern trade through the Strait of Malacca, which is actually how Funan will have their downfall. And what we're going to see is a theater state borrowed from the Gupta, military power, diplomacy, and control of trade, which allows them to maintain their position of power. But changes in trade route, much like the Funan, is going to be the reason for their downfall. And this is their location. And you can see there's a number of ports one can stop at. And bringing it home with Angkor Wat. This was originally a Hindu temple, but today it is actually a Buddhist temple. It is located in modern-day Cambodia, and it is the largest religious structure in the world that is still in use today as a religious temple. That's all we got for today, just in time, because I'm also out of coffee. Have a great night, guys. Cheers.